Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, Tony Jones, formerly of the Salt Lake Tribune. Where's he going next? I don't know. Derek Favors might know. I certainly don't. We're going to talk everything Jimmy Butler here. Jimmy Butler has decided to tell the Minnesota Timberwolves that he wants a trade. He does not want to play there this year. That news has just broke about an hour ago or so. So I got Tony here. We're just going to kind of talk through everything. I haven't really even 100% thought through this entire circumstance from everything that I'm supposed to really think about before talking about it. So this will be fun. Tony, how is it going over there?
I'm good. I'm just sitting here unemployed with all the time in the world on my hands.
I mean, Tony, I'm sure that a great NBA writer like you will get picked up at some point here. It's going to be just such good news whenever you find a job in this difficult industry. But let's get into the serious stuff here. Jimmy Butler told The Athletic's Shams Charania and John Krasinski, or at least someone in that circle did, that Jimmy is requesting a trade. Adrian Wojnarowski then reported that apparently the three teams here that Jimmy Butler would be willing to talk with, he has three preferred destinations, I guess: the Brooklyn Nets, the Los Angeles Clippers, and the New York Knicks. When the first report comes down, what is your initial reaction to this entire deal?
Well, my initial reaction is that, Tom Thibodeau, coach and GM of Pistons, of the Timberwolves, he's really on the hot seat. This was, when he made that trade for Jimmy Butler, here's the thing. And we've talked about this a little bit on Twitter. They make that trade, they give up three really nice talents to make the deal happen. You're talking about Chris Dunn, and you're talking about Zach LaVine, and then on top of that, you swap the number 7 pick for the number 16 pick. With that number 16 pick, you take Justin Patton, who you pointed out, didn't fit the roster, wasn't a fit for the roster fit-wise because he was the third center on the roster, and the Timberwolves had an inkling that Todd Gibson was going to come via free agency. And then on top of that, Justin Patton was now a 7-footer with foot problems, and we know how that turned out, how that typically turns out. And there are a whole host of guys on the board who have gone on, who went on to have great rookie seasons. So right now, if unless Tom Thibodeau really nails this trade, and he's going to have to nail this trade, it's a massive loss for him and the franchise. Yeah,
so I think that is definitely where to start. Is just kind of about the Tibbs of it all, I guess. That's kind of where my mind first went as well. You figured that if Jimmy Butler was going to be willing to play in a small market, that the Tom Thibodeau would probably be the best fit for that to work out. He goes there for a year. When he's healthy, Minnesota is very clearly the fourth best team in the Western Conference last year. You just look at the numbers, you look at their wins and losses. The team that you covered last year out in Utah, they obviously won, I think, 32 of their last 42 games, and we're on pace for like a 60-win season if you just count that half of the season. But during the first half, this Minnesota team was very clearly as successful as anyone in the Western Conference that was outside of those top three. So you look, or top two, really, I'm sorry. You look at where Minnesota was as a franchise going into that trade. This is a team that had not made the playoffs in about a decade. They were still trying to kind of figure out some building pieces around an Andrew Wiggins and a Karl Anthony Towns. Was Jimmy Butler the best fit for that group? I think that part of evaluation is knowing the personality of the people involved. You probably should have realized after a year with those two, if you're Tom Thibodeau, that Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, they might not be the most domineering personalities like Jimmy Butler tends to like to play with. And that Jimmy might grate on them as well. And, in a case where you're trading for a guy with 2 years left on his contract, and you have these other two players who have 6 and 7 years of team control left, you can't really default to Jimmy Butler in this scenario, I guess is the way to put it. You can't just say that whatever he says goes. You have to consider the future of your franchise here, especially whenever you're not competing for a title like Minnesota wasn't.
Yeah, I think with, Jimmy Butler, I think it was a risk worth taking. I think on the floor, I thought that he was a good fit. Obviously he's a top 15 player. He's an all-star, kind of, trending towards perennial all-star. And on the floor, he is a fit. He's a creator. He gave Minnesota a really, really, really good wing tandem with Andrew Wiggins. And I think that the hope was that, his personality would bring some of the personality out of Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it went the other way, and that's all in the risk that you're taking. All of these trades are a risk, right? Like, Kawhi Leonard, it's risk trading for Kawhi Leonard. It was a risk trading for Oklahoma City trading for Paul George. They're risk in different ways, but they're risk nonetheless. And this was a risk. It was a risk putting Jimmy Butler in the same locker room as Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. And Jimmy Butler's prickly personality, he had long been well known throughout the league, way before this trade was ever done. It was one of the reasons why, when it was clear that Jimmy Butler was available in Chicago towards the end of that run, that, truth be told, there weren't all that many teams lining up to make that trade because, the word was out throughout the league that behind closed doors, Jimmy Butler was, kind of difficult to get along with. So this was a risk, and, I think that Tibbs bet on himself a little bit and his ability to have a really good relationship with Jimmy. And just unfortunately, it wasn't not a good mesh, not a great mesh, not even a good mesh, bringing Jimmy into that locker room, with his two other stars. So, it's going to be interesting to see where this trade goes. What kind of deal that Minnesota is able to get back, and what kind of pieces Minnesota is able to get back, because it's kind of incumbent on this trade for Minnesota to stay playoff competitive. Otherwise, I'm sure Glenn Taylor is going to be looking to make a move and move on from Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, so there are a couple of really kind of interesting things there. In terms of the on-the-floor fit with Jimmy Butler, the thing that surprised me is that, even with Jimmy Butler on the floor last year, Minnesota, famously had tied for the 27th defense in the NBA last year. But even with Jimmy on the floor last year, that defense took a pitfall without him during that stretch where he missed about 23 games. But with him even, they were still just a league average defense. They really weren't anything special. And whenever you have, who for my money is one of the 10 best defenders in the NBA, it really is kind of surprising, and it says a lot about where this team is defensively and where their scheme is defensively in terms of Tom Thibodeau. And you also bring up the idea of, they probably have to stay competitive in order for this deal to be seen as a success. It's so complicated, I think, because there are so many different motivations now for how Minnesota approaches this trade. Because on one hand, I agree with you, and given the fact that Tom Thibodeau and Scott Layden, their general manager, they're going to be the guys consummating this deal, my guess is that they do look more toward a short-term fix as opposed to long-term benefit. Maybe you can somehow get both within a deal like this, but my guess is that you're right, that they're going to go more toward that because their jobs are on the line here, you would think. But the other thing worth considering here is that what's actually best for Minnesota? Should Minnesota be prioritizing 2018-19, or should they be prioritizing building a winner over the course of a 2 to 3 year stretch or a 3 to 4 year stretch around Andrew Wiggins?
Well, I don't think they want to start over. And, here's the thing. I mean, you still have two really young pieces in Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns. And, you've got to expose them to as much winning as possible in order to get to where you want. And, I don't think you have to start over because you have those young pieces, and those young pieces are in place. The second reason is I don't think they're going to be able to start over. I mean, I don't see the New York Knicks saying, hey, take our 2019 first-round pick. I don't see the Brooklyn Nets saying, hey, let me give you this asset right here. I don't see, the Sacramento Kings. Well, maybe the Sacramento Kings might do anything. But, I don't see many teams stepping up to give that kind of an asset out for Jimmy Butler because, number one, he's a short-term guy in terms of contract-wise. And number two, as you said, it's a massive risk trading for Jimmy Butler. I mean, he's going to have to go into the right locker room. And I think the teams that are motivated to step up and try to make a play for Jimmy Butler, I think that those are teams that are looking to be playoff competitive. I'm looking at, somebody like the Miami Heat. I mean, those, they're a treadmill team right now. But if you can find a certain deal with them, then that they might not be so much of a treadmill team trading for somebody like Jimmy Butler in his prime. So I think that the Timberwolves should be motivated to trade for playoff competitive. For a playoff competitive roster, and I think that the circumstances dictate around the league that the trade offers that they're going to get are more of the veteran variety than of the young pieces slash draft picks.
Yeah, and Miami is an interesting kind of spot for all of this too because they have the salaries where they could really kind of make this work. They have a James Johnson who's on a $14.6 million salary right now. Josh Richardson on a $9.4 million. Dion Waiters is hurt right now. It's hard to say if he would be a piece just because the foot injury seems to be so unclear right now. But they also have Tyler Johnson on $19 million if they wanted to do like Tyler Johnson and Bam Adebayo or something like that. If they find that Bam is the best young guy that they can get on the market. I don't even know if Miami would trade Bam Adebayo right now for Jimmy Butler. I would think they would, but Kelly Olynyk on $12.5 million right now as well. They have the pieces to really make the salary matching work, not only from the perspective of getting Jimmy Butler, but also they could even try and maybe finagle a way where they throw in Gorgui Dieng and maybe give Minnesota a year of relief on the Gorgui Dieng salary. Like if it was Tyler Johnson and Josh Richardson, and you might even have to add like a couple of other smaller salaries there. Maybe you throw in a Justice Winslow or something. You could kind of give relief to Minnesota on that Dieng deal where maybe Minnesota doesn't see Gorgui Dieng as something of a net negative asset, but I would imagine that the rest of the league does.
Yeah, and that's and I think with Miami, I mean, I think that it's a from their perspective, this is an opportunity for them, correct? Because Jimmy Butler and Dwayne Wade are really really close. Pat Riley's done something that he's never done, I don't think, in his career, which is kind of build a roster that's really going nowhere. That's really expensive, and and I think that this is a Jimmy Butler would be his opportunity to kind of figure a way out of that without having to pay the ultimate price. So I mean, and if I'm Minnesota, I love James Johnson because James Johnson is a really nice versatile piece. Had his best, arguably his best season last year. I still like, if I'm Minnesota, I really love Josh Richardson. I mean, I asked for James Johnson, Josh Richardson, and maybe a throw-in. There are ways for Minnesota to deal with Miami to at least be on par with what they were last year. And then, if you're Tom Thibodeau and you're Scott Layden, you go to Karl Anthony Towns and you say, you know what? Guess what, young fellas? You're out of excuses. You're not gonna be conceding touches anymore. You're not gonna have Jimmy in the locker room anymore. This is your team. This is truly your roster. This is what you're gonna make of it. You've been in the league long enough that you know how to carry a roster. You have the talent to do it. Let's see you do it. And I think that if you're Minnesota, you try to take this and you try to turn this into a positive any way you can, and I think that that's one way to do it.
So you bring up the idea of Miami, and I think that is a really, really smart one. My favorite fit for Jimmy Butler is Indiana. Indiana has a team right now that I think legitimately is going to win 50 games in the Eastern Conference, and they could realistically, relatively easily kind of make this deal work. Like, you could do something like Bojan Bogdanovic, Corey Joseph, and Domantas Sabonis, and that's a pretty good deal if you're Minnesota. Minnesota gets a long-term piece in Sabonis that I think actually would fit reasonably well next to Karl Anthony Towns, despite them both being fives. You could even throw in someone like a Thaddeus Young for a Gorgui Dieng. You'd be getting bigger and less mobile, but you'd be able to give Minnesota that cap space and that cap relief that I'm sure that they would like to have in a trade like this. Again, though, I don't really know if they think of Dieng as like a net negative asset. Indiana has a fascinating just kind of number of assets that really, really work for Minnesota, I think, and could push them with a Victor Oladipo, with Jimmy Butler, with Miles Turner, with Tyreek Evans, and some of these other role players. They could legitimately become an Eastern Conference contender, I think.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good deal on both sides because of the presence of Sabonis, because, I really love the way that he developed over his sophomore year. He proved that he could be interchangeable with Miles Turner, so, the fit with Karl Anthony Towns wouldn't be a concern there. He's a guy that really rebounded the heck out of the basketball last year. Really good passer. He's a lot like his father, just a little bit smaller.
Yep.
And a little bit more athletic. So having him, having Bogdanovic, maybe pushing Wiggins back to the two, playing some shooting guard a little bit, while Bogdanovic plays the three. If I'm Minnesota, I'd take that package if a first was included. Try to get an asset out of that. I don't know that you can, but from Indiana's perspective, you put Jimmy Butler with Oladipo and Miles Turner. I mean, you have three really dynamic talents there. If I'm Indiana, I'm never throwing in Thaddeus Young. Thaddeus Young, that he means a lot to that team, and he means a lot to that organization. So, I'd keep Thaddeus Young from all points, but I think that's a good deal on both sides.
Yeah, and the thing that I keep coming back to with Jimmy Butler deals, and at some point we'll talk about the three teams that Jimmy wants to go to, but the thing that I keep coming back to with all of this is how gun shy will teams be in terms of giving up young assets that are extremely talented for guys that are essentially rentals. Like the Paul George deal last year, it ended up working out for Oklahoma City, but they've moved Victor Oladipo now and Domantas Sabonis in a deal that, sure, it worked for both sides now that Paul George has re-signed, but that was a deal that, in April, in March, that looked incredibly dangerous. And now you look at the Jimmy Butler deal where the Timberwolves gave up Lauri Markkanen, Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine, three really solid, highly drafted young players, and they're just going to have to get rid of Jimmy Butler again. They're going to have to try and recoup value. I wonder if teams are going to be a little bit gun shy right now in terms of the way that they value their young players, given how valuable players on rookie contracts and players on cost-controlled contracts can be in today's NBA.
Well, I think that's why you're not going to see the Lakers get involved in this. And,
well, the Lakers, the thing with the Lakers is they really can't get involved unless this drags until December. And we'll talk about if this is going to drag or not at some point. But because they have stretched Luol Deng, they really don't even have the wherewithal to do so. Like, they would have to trade.
Well, I think if you did Lonzo and Brandon Ingram, does that work?
It's like Lonzo, Brandon
but they're
Ingram.
Not Lonzo and Brandon Ingram.
Yeah, and something else too. They would have to give up to get the salaries to work, and they're just not going to do that. There's no reason for that. So like they really don't have the wherewithal.
They don't have the wherewithal, and even if they did, I don't think that they would give up any of their young talent. I think that their goal and their philosophy as an organization right now is, hey, we have the guys that are on rookie deals who could develop into dynamic talents. We have LeBron James, and we have the ability to carve out max cap space next summer. So they want their cake and eat it too at this point. So they're not gonna give up young assets for Jimmy Butler. It'll be interesting to see if the Knicks did. That to me is going to be the barometer and the measuring stick of the question that you asked, because the Knicks are a team that's on Jimmy Butler's wish list. They're a team that could probably put together a list of young talent that doesn't involve that probably centers around somebody like a Courtney Lee, but it involves young talent, but doesn't involve Kristaps Porzingis. And they're a team that has a need to put star power in place in their market and in their roster. So will they make that move or will they not make that move? And I think that's a barometer of what you're asking, to see what that kind of value is around the league for Jimmy Butler in terms of garnering young talent in return.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second. Before that, though, I want to tell you about Simple Contacts. It's the most convenient way to renew your contact lens prescription in the 21st century. I'm sorry, it is vision care for the 21st century. If you need to renew your prescription, take the 5-minute Simple Contacts vision test online. It'll be reviewed by a licensed doctor, and you will receive a renewed prescription, and you'll be able to reorder your contacts. All you need is your current contacts, an internet connection, and 10 feet of space. Even if you're totally out of contacts, they have an option for you. And if you have an unexpired RX, all you have to do is upload a photo or your doctor's information and order your lenses. There are a million things demanding your time. Contact lenses really should not be one of them. Simple Contacts lets you renew your prescription and reorder your contacts from anywhere in minutes. This vision test is self-guided. It takes less than 5 minutes. It's so fast. It's reliable. And also Simple Contacts is going to offer you choices. They have all of the brands and types of lenses that you're familiar with, so you never have to shop around and kind of find your lenses at a bunch of different eye doctors and vision care places. It's really a great experience, and it saves you money. The vision test is only $20. If you compare that with an appointment, which without insurance is going to cost you up to $200, it's really just kind of great savings. The contact lens prices are unbeatable. Standard shipping is free. And best of all, we are offering a promotion to our listeners. Go to simplecontacts.com/gametheory20. That's GAMETHEORY. GameTheory20. You get $20 off of your first order of contacts at simplecontacts.com/gametheory20. Or if you enter that GameTheory20 code at checkout. Look, Simple Contacts is not a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam, but it can really, really save you a lot of time in how you take care of your eyesight. I am a Simple Contacts user. It is a great experience for me. It is so easy to order contacts, and I am such a big fan of what their service is. So go to simplecontacts.com/gametheory20, GAMETHEORY20, and get that $20 off of your first order. The Knicks are very interesting to me, Tony, as you kind of brought up, because a lot of people are kind of just saying like Enes Kanter makes the most sense here. The problem is that if the Knicks give up Enes Kanter, they're giving up a lot of their cap space for next summer as well. So it really has to be something like a Tim Hardaway Jr., a Courtney Lee, or a Courtney Lee and a Lance Thomas. That probably makes the most sense to me, as well as one of the young players like Frank Ntilikina or Kevin Knox. And the problem with that, I think, is that it basically has to be one of Frank Ntilikina or Kevin Knox. And if I was the Knicks, I don't know if I would be willing to do that. Like, I don't know if I'm giving up either of those guys. Like, I think I probably would give up Ntilikina for Jimmy Butler, but it's at least a debate in my mind, just given that I might be able to sign Jimmy Butler as a free agent next summer anyway. Like, we might be able to convince him and Kyrie to come here next summer. Why would we give up value when we don't have to?
Well, there's I think a lot of people will look towards the Lakers as one of the answers to that question, which is, should the Lakers have gone out and traded for Paul George when they had a chance to, considering how things are turning out, considering how things have turned out. I think the Lakers made the right decision, because even if they didn't get Paul George, they got LeBron James, and I think that if you look at Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Kyle Kuzma, and Josh Hart, I think there's a possibility that two of those guys can become really dynamic players, really dynamic talent. So I think that the Lakers made the right move. So what's the right move for the Knicks? I don't think that they're on as good a standing, as good a standing as the Lakers were at this time last year, because it's clear that the Lakers had some inkling at that point last year, that they were going to get LeBron James. So do the Knicks think that they're going to be able to get Kyrie Irving? So if the answer is yes, and the answer is yes, they're going to have a really good chance to get Jimmy Butler as well. Why are you giving that, value in return? The other thing is, the Knicks value doesn't equal what the Lakers value was. The Lakers have four really promising young guys, and the Knicks don't have that. They have Kevin Knox. They have Kristaps Porzingis, who is not going to be traded under many circumstances. And they have Frank Ntilikina, who is probably not going to be as good as any of the four Laker guys that we talk about. So, I think it's every situation is different. The Knicks situation is certainly different than what the Lakers situation was. But if you're the Knicks, you got to bet on yourself, and if you're Steve Mills, you have to bet on the talent that you have on the roster, and you also have to bet on having David Fizdale there and his contacts and relationship with guys around the league. And if you do stand pat, maybe you do come out of next summer with Kyrie Irving and Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, and we should probably talk about the Nets and the Clippers as well here in this regard. The Nets are really interesting to me because this is a team that, because of the disastrous Kevin Garnett and Paul George deal, they haven't had any sort of high draft picks in years. Now, Sean Marks has done an unbelievable job. Kenny Atkinson deserves some credit here as well in going out and being willing to take on expensive assets in order to get actual valuable assets. Like, they take on the Timofey Mozgov contract to get a D'Angelo Russell. They take on the Damari Carroll contract in order to get another first-round pick. The Kenneth Faried and Darrell Arthur deals to get another first-round pick. Like, this team is very asset-rich now in a way that it shouldn't be, but there also has to be some sort of feeling there that they probably want to go out and finally use a high draft pick at some point. Like, this is still a Nets team that, in my opinion, probably doesn't get to 32 wins this year. I think that's their over-under. They're probably looking at a top 10 pick if they stand pat, and they're going to have a top 10 pick. They're going to have D'Angelo Russell. They're going to have Jarrett Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie's bird rights at least, and they're going to be very, very cheap bird rights, as well as some younger players that are at least very interesting, and Joe Harris and Alan Crabb that are still on this roster. But there's also the fact that they could go out and move a Damari Carroll. They could go out and move a Kenneth Faried for salary matching purposes and really make it kind of easy for Timberwolves trade for Jimmy Butler. Like, they could easily trade Damari Carroll, Karis LeVert, and like the Nuggets pick for Jimmy Butler. And that's a completely reasonable move for them, but I just don't know if that's better than the alternative of getting Jimmy Butler, having your pick tumble down into like the teens once you make the playoffs, and then having Jimmy Butler and then potentially Kyrie sign or maybe leave? Or is it you just wait for them to come in free agency again? Like you brought up the Lakers, and I think that's an astute point. But it's this weighing of factors that every team is really going to have to consider, because Jimmy has now said who his 3 teams are that he's looking at most. So you really have to think about, okay, is this what we're looking at here? Is this a smart move for us? Should we wait? Should we go out and make the aggressive move? And especially for the Nets, who have built so long for moments like this, it's a complicated discussion, I think.
So if I'm the Nets, my situation is different than the Knicks, and I make an offer. And this is the offer that I make. I make the offer of DeMar Carroll and D'Angelo Russell for Jimmy Butler. And I think that that's a fair deal. And the reason why I do that is because, you know, I want to pair Jimmy Butler with Jared Allen and, you know, the young talent that they have. As you said, you're just starting to get assets back within the organization. And Jimmy Butler wants to be, he clearly wants to be in a bigger market, and he wants to be, he's interested in the New York market. You know, I would make that deal because to me, you know, if I'm the Nets, D'Angelo Russell is expendable because I have Spencer Dinwiddie, and because of how well Spencer Dinwiddie's played in that system over the last year and a half. And the fact that, as you said, you know, you have Spencer Dinwiddie as a guy with cheap bird rights. And you know, I just think that you can part with that. Maybe I throw in a Karis LeVert, even though I'd be really hesitant to, because I really like Karis LeVert. But you know, if you're Minnesota, I think you can do worse than getting a dynamic talent like D'Angelo Russell. And I say talent, not player. Dynamic talent, D'Angelo Russell for Jimmy Butler.
The talent aspect of that
kind of situation.
Yeah, the talent aspect of that is very interesting because, you know, we just went through this entire thing with Karl Towns and Andrew Wiggins, you know, their personalities apparently being a bit passive for Jimmy Butler. I mean, I don't know about you, but I struggle to see how D'Angelo Russell would be a great fit with Jimmy Butler and how, like, D'Angelo wouldn't drive Jimmy crazy.
Yeah, D'Angelo's Hollywood, though. You know, and so he's like kind of an opposite. Of Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins.
That's true.
Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony barely said a word, you know. So if they're like the 0, D'Angelo Russell's like the 100. So, you know, and I'm, you know, but that's the thing with Jimmy Butler. Who has he gotten along with?
That's a good question.
Like, serious. Like, who has he gotten along with? Like, has he gotten along with, you know, the people who don't say a word? Has he gotten along with the people who are boisterous? Has he gotten along with anybody in between? Who has he gotten along with? At some point, he's the constant. At some point, he's got to figure out a way to ingratiate himself with the rosters that he's involved with. So, I mean, you know, that's what I struggle with.
You know,
that's my question.
I think I agree with you that if I was the Nets, I would make an offer. I would probably be willing to go in. You know, it is a difficult decision, I think, in a lot of ways, but this is kind of the way that they could go about making their rebuild very real. And I think that if Jimmy liked it there, and I think he would like it there, just given the culture that the Nets have built up, they really do value hard work. They really do seem to value the right kind of things that Jimmy has professed to like in the past. I think that would work, and I think that they could maybe bring in a Kyrie Irving in the summer, or maybe someone else like a Kyrie, and make this all work. But we come to the third team now, and it's funny that you bring up the idea of who does Jimmy Butler get along with. Well, the Clippers just signed Lee Jenkins from Sports Illustrated to a role that is very confusing to me in many ways, but also has potential to maybe help with that idea of who Jimmy Butler gets along with. He is the executive director of research and identity. It seems like they're going to use him to kind of utilize his ability to garner insights from feature subjects and learn about their motivating factors and all of what they have learned over the course of their career, and utilize that on the basketball floor and figure out how to utilize it in the locker room. I'm still a little bit confused on what the exact deal is, but shout out to Lee Jenkins. That is a fantastic move for him. Good for him. The Clippers at least have an interesting number of assets that they could offer as well, given the fact that they do have these 2 lottery picks that they used last year in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jerome Robinson. They also have some salary filler and salary matching that could really help them with the contract of Danilo Gallinari.
So from the Clippers, I'm making an offer because, you've lost Lob City and then some over the last 2 years. So, you make an offer and, like you said, Danilo Gallinari, he'd be an offer because, frankly, I mean, if you're Minnesota, Gallinari can help you. Well, if he can stay on the floor. Okay, but that's a big if. In knowing how much Tibbs really likes veterans, I mean, you could maybe offer Gallinari, offer Jerome Robinson, maybe a Patrick Beverly, and maybe Tibbs really likes that. But I mean, you have a lot of veterans on that team, and you could probably make a move. Look, the Clippers have to do something, because right now they're in a bad way roster-wise. However, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I mean, he has a chance to be. I think he has a chance to be a star at some point.
He's the one guy that I'm keeping if I'm them. For sure, no question, I am keeping him.
You're definitely keeping him. But I mean, the rest of that roster, I mean, those were veterans that were acquired in order to complement the presence of Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, and they're not there anymore. Those 2 guys are not there anymore. So, I think if you're the Clippers, you try to be proactive, and you're on the phone right now with Scott Layden, and you're trying to throw together an offer. I think that if you're Brooklyn, you're trying to throw together an offer. I think if you're the Knicks, you have so far to go in terms of asset accumulation that you are not throwing together an offer, and you're just going to have to just try to accumulate assets and try to do things and not skip steps. But those other 2, along with Miami, Indiana, as you said, I think if you're Detroit, you try to maybe throw in an offer around one of the veterans, not Blake Griffin, not Andre Drummond, and you try to see if you can gain some interest there. All of the treadmill teams, those teams that have a lot of veterans that are kind of 7th, 8th, kind of in that treadmill hamster range. I mean, I think all of those teams should be on the phone with Minnesota right now, trying to figure out if they can do something to shake up their collective rosters.
Yeah, and the Clippers, you bring up a really interesting kind of thought there with them, just because, they could do something like Marcin Gortat and Wesley Johnson. They could do Milos, Wesley Johnson, and Patrick Beverly to get the salary needed with like a younger player. The other aspect of the Clippers here that's very interesting, like they have a lot of salary matching abilities, but the 2019 pick, they theoretically don't own it right now. But I don't know about you. I don't really consider the Clippers a playoff team in the Western Conference next year. Their pick is top 14 protected right now. So they will essentially be giving Boston their pick if they were to make the playoffs. If I was them, I might want this first rounder to go through this year as opposed to having to wait around again till 2020. And the reason that I say that is that
because this draft is trash.
This draft is not very good, especially once you get outside of the top 4. The top 4, I think, are pretty good. But once you get outside of that range, you're going to be in kind of trouble city. And that's definitely where the Clippers are going to end up in this draft, at least based off of math. They're probably going to end up there. So
who are we going top 4 right now? We're going RJ, we're going Zion, Cam Reddish, and the big man out of Arkansas, correct? Daniel Gaddis?
No, Nasir Little would be 4. Those 3, the first 3 are 100% right. I would have Nasir Little 4. I'd have Gafford somewhere in the top 10, though, too. Daniel Gafford's really good. I actually just wrote Quentin Grimes last night too. I like Quentin Grimes. I have number probably, and I probably shouldn't be giving all of this away, but like I have Quentin Grimes somewhere in that like top 6-7 range. I don't really feel like he's your normal like top 7 preseason guy. Like he's fine and he's really, really good and has a high ceiling, but there are questions there. Like he's still an inconsistent shooter. He's not super explosive vertically. Like there are worries that are going to continue to kind of prop up throughout the whole season. So I am with you that this draft is very questionable. And if I was the Clippers, if I'm getting Jimmy Butler in, I might.
Right, you want that.
Yeah, I might want to make a run to the playoffs so that I can get rid of this obligation now, and then in the future not have to worry about it. And then maybe bring in Kyrie and try and maneuver around the constraints that I will then have.
Well, I think we need to give some context to how trash this draft has a chance to be. I mean, we're talking Jonte Porter as a lottery pick.
Yeah.
And, you know, does Jonte crack the first round of this past draft had he stayed in?
Yeah, it was questionable. I think he probably he's one of those guys that has like fans, like huge fans around the NBA. Like he's obviously someone that, you know, the quote unquote draft Twitter loves and thinks he's like incredible. There are people in the NBA who really do like him that way, but he's very polarizing around the NBA also.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of guy you're talking about as a lottery pick, like a guy that's very polarizing right now. Like, I'm trying to think, like Louis King is a guy that I've got probably in my top 20. John Calipari like chose not to, or he took him to, Egypt and then like chose not to recruit him afterward, after his, you know, dealings with the U19 World Championships. So like there are a lot of questions here. There's a lot of upside, I think. Like we just don't know a lot about this talent, but like I have Jare Foster as a borderline first round pick and he's coming off of an ACL injury. You know, Chris Wilkes, I've seen him up at UCLA. He looks really good, but like he was one of the worst players at the Combine last year, and I have him as a very clear first-round pick entering the year.
You look at Jalen McDaniels, who would have been, you know, a second-round pick at best if he stayed in the draft. He's, you know, a lot of people's top 15. You know, the guy that I really like, and I'm sorry if we're getting off brand here a little bit, but the guy that I really like, I like Jalen McDaniels a lot. Like I think that he's going to have a real breakout season at UCLA. I think that he's the best point guard in the Pac-12. I think he has a real chance to maximize his value into that lottery range if he has a really good season.
I will say I have never been a big fan of his game. He looked pretty good whenever I saw him at UCLA like a few weeks ago, like right before I left for vacation. Like he looked a lot better than what I thought he would ever really look at UCLA. Like I you know, like USC has Derek Thornton this year. He's at least interesting. 5-star kid, went to Duke, started for a year at Duke, and then kind of struggled to adjust behind Jordan McLaughlin last year, who was obviously USC's guy. You know, you can look at a guy like Jalen Hands. You can look at Peyton Pritchard. I think he's just steady and super smart in the Pac-12. Washington, I mean, depending on, you know, Jalen Noel's not really a point guard, but Jalen Noel's a really good player. No. The best point guard in the Pac-12 is McKinley Wright, for sure, I think. He's
okay, yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, sure. He's a stud.
He's a stud. And, you know, I think Kevin Porter's a stud as well. I mean, obviously he's not a point guard, but Kevin Porter's a stud.
Yeah, like USC is going to be sneaky okay. I was worried about them, like, before I started to really look at their roster. They're going to be pretty sneaky okay, I think. But let's jump back into Jimmy Butler stuff because there are a couple of just smaller kind of discussion points here that I want to bring up. Adrian Wojnarowski has, you know, been on this as well as Shams, and John Krasinski as well deserves a lot of credit here. Apparently Tom Thibodeau has no interest in trading Jimmy Butler before the season starts. He wants to try and get back to the playoffs and convince him to stay, maybe. I am kind of dumbfounded by that idea. It does not seem these issues have been bubbling underneath the surface, and really not even underneath the surface, for months upon months now. Like, it's hard for me to believe that Tom Thibodeau doesn't see that and just wants to try and like save himself by getting to the playoffs again.
He can't do that. Not with Jimmy Butler. Not in this locker room. And I think if he tries to force this, the thing is, you're sending a message to Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins that, under no circumstances do I trust you. And I would rather keep this guy against his will to try to help me win than to turn the reins of the roster over to you young guys. And it's one of the reasons why I was, I thought that it was a good move getting Tom Thibodeau. But one of the worries when he first got that job is, he's just not he's just not very conducive to player development. In the age ranges of Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins. If Tom Thibodeau were the coach of the Utah Jazz, how much of a reign would Donovan Mitchell have gotten last year?
Yeah, I don't think that they would. I don't think Donovan Mitchell would be nearly what we talk about. I will say that
Donovan Mitchell would have been coming off the bench behind Alec Burks.
He definitely would have been, but I can also. This is one of those times where Donovan is, this is better than anyone, but like Donovan is such a special dude and like works so incredibly hard that I can see Donovan being like the only rookie to ever endear himself to Thibodeau.
Possibly. Or I can see Thibodeau just staying totally on brand and being like, he's not ready, I'm just going to play him 12 minutes a night.
Yeah, very possible. Very, very possible.
And Donovan would have scored 14 points in those 12 minutes a night, still wouldn't have been ready by the playoffs. But, I digress. The point is, he's just, Tibbs is just, he's just not great. He's real old school, and he's just not great. He's just not great to be around if you're a rookie or a second or a third year guy. And I thought that had the potential to, I don't want to say blow up, but kind of go left, and it did go left. So I think if you're Tibbs, man, like in this situation, I think every situation is different. Like I thought Cleveland should have held on to Kyrie and told Kyrie to kick rock and get his butt to camp and play with LeBron and try to make another run at that title last year. And, they turned out not to get very much for Kyrie at all. In fact, they turned out to get nothing for Kyrie. I think if you're Tibbs, you got to get Jimmy out of there, because I think that, what's left of your locker room is at stake with this. And I think that, if he does this now, I think that he has a chance to get guys back who will help his team, because I think there's enough people out there who want to trade for Jimmy that he's going to get some value out of this. And I think that, you still got Jeff Teague, you still got Taj Gibson, you still got your two young guys, you got Luol Deng. So you have a good mix of veterans and younger guys in there, and I think that they had a really surprisingly good draft. So I think that right now you try to acquiesce to Jimmy's wishes and try to get as much as you can. And the way you save face is by getting as much as you can and turning that team into a playoff team. I think that's the answer for Jimmy. For Thibodeau.
Yeah, I think that I am with you on that. It is a tough situation, just given what they gave up last year. And that's kind of where I want to kind of maybe finish this conversation on. If we knew what we know now, that they would have to trade Jimmy Butler right now, would you have made that deal knowing that it got you back to the playoffs last year for the first time in a decade? Would you have traded? Let's say they even make a better pick than Justin Patton. Let's say that they make like Jimmy Butler, and at number 16, they take John Collins instead. Like, we'll say same position, but just a much better player. Because again, like you brought up at the top of this podcast, and I'm going to sidetrack here real quick. I had Justin Patton at like number 26 on my board when they took him at 16. You mentioned that I tweeted out, and I did. Like they took a bunch of centers. They had a bunch of centers on this roster. They knew they were getting Taj Gibson. It was an F pick when it happened because of team constructs, given the way that the modern NBA is going. And it was a situation where Justin Patton had injuries, kind of already. He was hurt right before the draft, if I remember correctly, and he has now been hurt throughout the course of his career so far. He was a project big man for a team that didn't have a G League team for him to develop with consistently. There are so many issues with that pick that it was an F pick immediately, and I wish Justin Patton the best, but it just wasn't the right pick. So let's say that Minnesota makes a better pick. Let's say they take Josh Hart even at number 16, which is, I had him higher than Justin Patton. So, I mean, let's say that it's a worthwhile endeavor. Let's say it's Jimmy Butler and Josh Hart for Lowry Marketing, Chris Dunn, and Zach LaVine. Like, is this a deal that they should have done to get back to the playoffs anyway? And then they're also going to get something for trading Jimmy Butler now?
Knowing how everything turned out, even as is, I won't even go as far as you. I'll still take the Justin Patton pick. I would have still done the trade if I were Tom Thibodeau, because while it was a really risky deal, Jimmy Butler is a top 10 to top 15 guy, and you have to, if you're Minnesota, I think you take that chance. I mean, if you can get a, top 10 to top 15 guy for, guys who are at that time who are unproven, and two of those guys are still unproven. I mean, Chris Dunn and Zach LaVine, despite Zach LaVine's monstrous contract, those guys are still unproven. Lowry Marketing to me is more proven because I think he's going to be a really good player. You still take that pick, you still take that chance, and you still make that trade. Just the problem is, I don't think, I think, you're exactly correct. I think Tibbs made the worst choice possible at number 16, and now we don't know when or if Justin Patton's going to return to an NBA court because, his feet can't stay healthy. And I think that Tibbs mismanaged just a little bit. I mean, I think that he should have shown a lot more deference to Karl Anthony Towns than he did, on and off the floor. And I think with Andrew Wiggins, a lot more development, off the floor could have taken place. But I think at the heart of it, at the crux of it, I think it was the right move to make. It was the correct move to make. It just did not work out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think that at the time, it was still the right move to make. They maybe didn't execute some of the things that were necessary within the context of making this deal possible. Could you maybe make an argument that they should have prioritized this package for Paul George, given the fact that Paul George re-signed and seems to be a little bit more amenable as a personality than Jimmy Butler? Maybe.
Nobody thought Paul. I know at that point.
Yeah, like nobody knew what Paul George was going to do, and it's only a 1-year situation with Paul George versus 2 years for Jimmy Butler. Jimmy was very clearly the more valuable asset going forward. If you want to make that argument, I would at least listen to it. But at the time, again, Jimmy was the more valuable player because of team control. And look, I mean, we have to separate Tibbs the GM from Tibbs the coach. I think Tibbs the coach mismanaged this situation terribly. I think Tibbs the GM made a calculated gamble that will still allow them to make the playoffs last year as well as get assets in return for Jimmy Butler if they trade him before the season. Now, Tibbs has to round this out by actually trading him. And we'll see if that happens. I would imagine it will at some point. I'm sure that it's just posturing. But I think I agree. I think that I would do it. And I think that at the end of the day, it's a situation where just because this team's defense ended up still being a tire fire and because Tibbs the coach could never blend the personalities necessary together, I don't know that we can blame Tibbs, the GM, for that. Maybe it is. Maybe it's all interconnected. It probably is, just given the personality. But I'm at least willing to separate that out and say this was a smart move that just wasn't executed properly.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I mean, I think it was the right move, and I just think that, from day one of actually making that move, I think that it was, it wasn't managed the way it could have been. At the same time, though, I mean, there's pressures of trying to keep Jimmy Butler, so I can understand, why Tibbs made some of the decisions that he made in terms of deferring to Jimmy Butler and clearly putting him over Karl Anthony Towns in terms of the pecking order, because you had to endear yourself to him to the point where, hey, he's going to want to resign in 2 years. I mean, the clock was ticking on that. But it just didn't work. I mean, where all of this worked in Oklahoma City, where Sam Presti and Russell Westbrook, they all pushed the right buttons. I just don't think it just did not work in Minneapolis, and it's the risk. So you saw the positive of taking such a risk with Paul George, and now you've seen the negative of taking such a risk with Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, and I mean, it's all cultural. It's all connected. I mean, it's probably not a situation where I should be separating it all out like that. Having Billy Donovan as a coach who was able to foster this defense in a way that it was, when everyone was healthy, one of the best defenses in the league, despite the presence of Carmelo Anthony. He fostered the personalities of Russell Westbrook and Paul George and Sam Presti, and that entire organization from a top-down manner really handled it well. I think we can say now that Minnesota necessarily did not put in the proper things in place to make this as great a fit as it could have been. And part of it is Jimmy Butler as well. There's blame to go around for the situation now, though. It seems like Tom Thibodeau is really going to have to just cut bait and make sure that he gets something of value for Butler, because otherwise it could really set this organization back. We were all very, very excited about the Minnesota Timberwolves after we knew what Karl Anthony Towns was. I mean, with the Andrew Wiggins pick, we will say Wiggins' value has seen some luster come off of it for obvious reasons. Tyus Jones looks like a hit of some sort. He, in my opinion, will be a starting point guard in the NBA. But because they have that middle road value already set out due to Karl Towns being as good as he is, you really run the risk of becoming that, as you have said throughout the podcast, that treadmill team. That team that might be stuck in the middle for a while, and this is a talent base that has potential for a lot more than that. So that's the risk that Tom Thibodeau is running now if he doesn't make a trade, or if he makes a poor trade here. He runs the risk of this becoming a treadmill team. Well,
here's the thing, man. It's like if Jimmy Butler, under the best of circumstances, is a prickly personality, can you imagine him in your locker room if you keep him against his will and he's asked for a trade and you go into the regular season with him on your roster? Can you imagine how that locker room is going to be?
No. I don't want to make Minnesota fans.
You can't imagine it, or you don't want to imagine it?
I don't want to imagine it, because it will just be absolutely miserable, and there's no circumstance to where that helps.
Tibbs is in the locker room. He's already a miserable guy. Cat and Wiggins are miserable. Jimmy's miserable. Poor Tyus Jones is I stayed home for this. It would just be. I would want to be a fly on the wall in that locker room if Tibbs is you know what, kick rocks, Jimmy. I'm keeping you. And I just really, really, really love to see, Glenn Taylor's got to step in it, and Scott Layden, they both got to step in and be Tom, I know you don't want to, but we got to trade him. You got to trade him, right? You have to. Am I correct? Am I missing something? Because I know that Tibbs is at least publicly, through sources saying, I don't want to trade him.
I think you gotta. I think you absolutely have to trade him. The funniest thing from last year that I can remember about the Timberwolves is, just given Tom Thibodeau's propensity to not play players. Before what I guess it was the Derrick Rose signing, which happened like late March, if I remember correctly. It might have been like early April. The Timberwolves, despite Jimmy Butler having missed time, despite Jeff Teague having missed time, Bjelica missed like a 15-game stretch in there too. They only played 13 players throughout like the first 65 to 70 games of the season. That is so crazy to me. That is, when you go through injuries like that, you tend to just cycle through players. And because Thibodeau is the coach and not scouring the G League for talent, maybe it's because he just didn't think it was necessary to have a lot of depth on the roster. This team only played 13 guys last year through the first like 5.5 months of the season. That is impossible to me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you on that. I just want to see what happens from here. But depending on how that trade goes, I mean, the Western Conference playoff race can have a little bit more clarity. And this is good for the San Antonio Spurs because Minnesota was one of the teams that, in my eyes, that San Antonio was going to be fighting for the playoffs with, and I think that this could have the potential to eliminate Minnesota from that race, and I think it's good for the Memphis Grizzlies because I think, in my eyes, I think Memphis is going to has a chance to be the most improved team in the league, getting Mike Conley back, and I think that this has a chance to let Memphis at least compete for a playoff spot.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that might be the best place to finish this podcast is just other fallout from this trade. I agree with you. I think the Spurs are in much better position now. Memphis as well in better position. The Clippers, you could even say, are in better position if they want to try and make the playoffs with all of their vets. If I was the Spurs, I would consider making an offer as well, by the way. Try and pair Jimmy Butler with Greg Popovich, DeMar DeRozan, LaMarcus Aldridge in a very professional organization, which he has professed to really be stridently looking for, as well as a defensively inclined organization. Greg Popovich, again, I've made this case quite a few times now that I think he might be the best defensive coach in NBA history, just given the Spurs' ranks defensively in his tenure there. Like, that's the kind of fit that you could see working in terms of getting him to stay in a smaller market. I might consider making an offer there too.
Small forward, and they don't currently have a small forward. Their small forward right now is DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah. Like if you can put together an offer of, let's say, what probably has to be.
I'm Minnesota. I want their young guys. I want Lonnie Walker.
Yep.
I want Derek White.
Yep.
It's like the conversation's got to start with Derek White and Lonnie Walker. Both of those guys.
To me, it probably has to start with DeJounte Murray. If I was I'm not like a huge DeJounte guy. I do think that the Spurs really like him, and I think that a lot of people around the league really like him. I'm questionable on the long-term offense, but to me, that's probably where I have to start. Like I have to say, okay, if you want Jimmy Butler, maybe DeJounte Murray, and if not, I agree with you. Then it's Lonnie Walker and Derek White. And then you're at, if that's the case, you're at like $4 million plus, Patty Mills at like 11.5. That gets you to 15.5. I don't think that gets you to the salary match that you need because Jimmy's making 20. So you'd probably need to add in someone like a, like a Bryn Forbes. Like a Bryn Forbes. I don't know. But yeah, you can make this. You can make a deal work there. And
if you're Minnesota, Davis Bertans because you lost Bjelica. So
yes, but can Bertans be traded until December though?
No, because he just signed, didn't he? So
it's actually January. So yeah,
you can always ask for Rudy Gay.
Rudy can't be traded until December because he opted out as well.
Oh, he just resigned as well. So
yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, so it might have to be Gasol.
Oh God. I'm so sorry, Timberwolves fans. The other fallout that I think is interesting is I think that if he does get traded to one of the three like destination locations, right, that's probably bad for Boston because Kyrie is obviously a free agent after the season, and I can't see a circumstance where Boston trades Kyrie. Having said that, they are going to run the risk of losing him for nothing in the offseason just because it does seem like there is some smoke building toward a Jimmy Butler and Kyrie Irving marriage, maybe we'll say.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. This is, never stops, does it?
No, the NBA never stops. Luckily, you're on a quick little, hopefully quick little sabbatical from the NBA coverage, at least.
God willing.
Tony, I would say tell the people where they can find your work, but unfortunately, you do not have a place of employment. So instead, I will direct you to the place of my work, The Athletic. Go subscribe to The Athletic. It's a really great website, making a lot of great hires every day. We broke this story at The Athletic.
Especially, they made a really, really great hire when they hired Sam.
This is true. I am very thankful that they hired me. I'm very thankful they hired Shams. I'm very thankful that they've hired everyone that they have hired so far. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.